Well, hello, ladies. I have a very special interview this week. I am here with the Archduchess, Kathleen de Habsbourg-Lorraine. So welcome, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Simone. It's so good to be here with you on my very first podcast. So go easy on me.
I will go easy on you, and it's such a gift that you're here with me. And you're just such a beautiful expression of the feminine genius, and that's what Endow is all about. So happy to talk to you, and thank you for talking to me all the way from Geneva. And so if the connection goes in and out, ladies, we're doing our best over here, so don't worry. But I remember you from our glory days in Washington D.C.
Those were yes.
Before you ran off and married Imre and became a duchess. And for those who are listening who are history buffs, if you hear the word Habsburg, you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So I'd love to pick your brain today and talk to you about what your life was like as a Catholic woman before, and then now your life in your vocation to marriage, to motherhood, and to being part of Austrian royalty. So please, let's begin with your life before you abandoned your American roots and went to Europe, because I remember you as we were acquaintance friends, and a strong, just a beautiful example of the feminine genius. And so tell us a little bit about your life before.
Well, it's so true. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, because I had written a blog in college and about how I wanted my children to grow up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and to go to exactly the same schools that I went to. And really, I had a wonderful childhood, so I wanted to pass that on to them and be close to my parents but God had some very different plans. And the first step on that was to take me to Washington with the pro-life movement, where I had passionately worked for this for most of my life, and I came to Washington to work for life, and while I was there 2 years later, I met my now husband. And they were great years there in Washington, and I always look back super fondly, especially just meeting so many other amazing Catholic women. I think you can appreciate this, but I had a moment on probably the first year that I moved to Washington. I had just broken up with a guy that I was dating quite seriously, and I didn't really know anybody yet in DC. And I was sitting in the gym, the parking lot of like a gym nearby, and I was just praying, like, God, please, I need good Catholic women in my life. Please, please, please. I desperately need this. I'm longing for it. And he answered that prayer so profusely and profoundly. I had made just my best friends who deepened my faith, gave me the courage to face my vocation and to take the next steps. And I'm so grateful for that. And I still just remember that moment. And that's.
I know it's beautiful. And I remember kind of watching from the sidelines all of this happening in your life. And I think one of the beautiful things too is the connection between Blessed Karl of Austria and his wife Empress Zita, and your vocation story. And listeners, please know that when I was teaching high school a few years ago, I just met so many amazing people when I was studying and working in the DC area, and just thought, as a teacher, I'm just one person, but there are so many amazing people that I met there. And I thought, I'm going to ask my friends over there to make little videos on their careers, their jobs, their vocations, but those who had a very, very strong Catholic faith. And so you and Imre sent one of those videos in talking about your love story, your vocation story, and the kids loved it, and it was so beautiful. So thank you for doing that for all the young students that it touched. But now for Endow listeners, please tell us a little bit about your devotion and your story. I think they will love it.
Yeah, sure. Let's see, where do I start? So one of the parishes in Washington that's kind of very vibrant with a lot of young adults who like the Tridentine Mass, as I do, is St. Mary, Mother of God in Chinatown. And I would very often go to St. Mary's on Sundays. And but I would kind of switch time. A priest told me once, I was like, oh, I go here to mass sometimes, and sometimes I go here. And he was like, that's what Protestants do. I was like, ouch.
In there.
Yeah.
You to belong to a place and a people. Yes.
But St. Mary's has a devotion to Blessed Karl. It's an old historically a German parish, and they have a devotion to Blessed Karl. But I first heard about Blessed Karl via his wife, servant of God, Zita, from a magazine article in 2009, probably, or maybe early 2010, talking about the last Catholic empress. And it told her story. And I was just so touched by her strength, her acceptance of God's will in her life, her very kind of dramatic but beautiful story. Just to very briefly, she and her husband were the last emperor and empress of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Mm-hmm. They were very young when they were called to the throne after the death of Franz Joseph and Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and they both had an incredibly deep spiritual life, and their marriage was very oriented towards God. And there's this famous quote that touches a lot of people, that Blessed Karl turned to his wife on the day before their wedding and said, okay, now we have to get each other to heaven. Mm-hmm. And that's basically, in a nutshell, the whole goal of marriage. And they lived their lives out in such a beautiful way. They only had 10 years together before he died.
It's heartbreaking to me. It's heartbreaking.
Yes, absolutely. But they had 8 children during the fall of the the empire after World War I. During all this time, they had many friendships that were kind of broken, and so many things that just a really tragic kind of ending to this once great empire.
Yeah.
And they were finally exiled to Madeira in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with their 8 children, and they had absolutely no money, and someone had given them a house on the top of a hill to live in. Yeah. And that's where they spent the last few months of Karl's life, where he developed pneumonia because it was a very humid tropical environment in the middle of winter, and died I think at the age of 34. She was pregnant with their 8th child at the time. Mm-hmm. And his last words were, I love you so much, to Zita, and then to Jesus. They had the Blessed Sacrament in his room. Yes, Lord, yes. And that was really kind of a defining characteristic of his life, was this complete abandonment to the will of God.
Yeah.
So you lose your throne, you lose your everything.
It shows you really, like, empires come and go, monarchs come and go, but mm-hmm. The kingdom of God stays. And the fact that he began his vocation to marriage with this Catholic focus, and then ended his life with Jesus on his lips, and mm-hmm. He was working very much with Pope Benedict XV, who is often the most underrated and understudied Pope. And one of the reasons why our beloved Pope Benedict XVI chose his name was partially because of Pope Benedict XV, who, mm-hmm. and I wonder sometimes, was Ratzinger just saying, like, I might be unliked too? I wonder, because he's this precious German introvert, but poor Pope Benedict XV, who with Blessed Karl, really fought for a lot of peace and tried to avoid wars in World War I. And so we see just the big picture of, the collapse of the Holy Roman Emperor, the beginning of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then Blessed Karl being called to this really difficult position at such a young age, married young, and having and really, you really feel Mother Teresa's words, faithfulness, not success. I think
absolutely. And that's, I think, such a big message, which is why John Paul II beatified him as well. It's such a message for our day, for politicians, for people in positions of power. The failure in the eyes of the world can be really success in the eyes of God. Yes. Really, if we abandon ourselves to his will till the end, which is what he really did. And that's something that is so touching to me. And as even as I get older, just kind of diving deeper into the abandonment that he must have felt from friends, from family, from his country, from absolutely everything, but just to like hold on to Eucharist the way that he did. He had incredible devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, spent many hours in prayer, instructed his children to do likewise. So anyway, this is Blessed Karl, but on the side of that all is this character of Zita, who is now a widow at the age of 29. Pregnant with her 8th child in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, far from friends, far from family, far with no money. What do you do as a 29-year-old woman who had been an empress, who now does not know what the future holds for her children? Will they be called back to the throne? Will they? What does the future hold for them? How are they going to make ends meet in the short term? And how are we going to educate? How are we going to continue on in the legacy of Blessed Karl, to raise strong children full of faith who are ready to answer God's call to do His will?
Yes.
And she did that in this amazing way. You can just feel kind of her strength at the side of her husband throughout his life, and then also kind of continuing in that vocation of wife and mother through the rest of the 20th century. She died in her late 90s. She always wore black in honor of her husband, and she raised these kind of wonderful kids who kept the faith and who also had very sometimes difficult lives, but it says my internet connection's unstable. Anyway.
No, I can hear you very well. Yes, I can hear you very well.
So I read this article about Zita, and I just was so impressed by this story, especially her faithfulness, and how, like, you know, I was a young woman hoping to get married one day, and to think, wow, she was clearly so in love with this man, and then to only have 10 short years with him, and then to really be faithful to him and stay really united to him throughout her long, long widowhood is so touching.
Yes.
So,
fortitude, unbelievable fortitude.
Unbelievable, heroic fortitude, voila. Yes. So, yes, and so I really felt kind of called to this person of Zita, and to make her story a little bit better known, because I had never heard of her before. So I talked to her, to my friends. I really prayed to her and put my vocation in her hands. I said, "You are a wonderful wife and mother. I would love to be a wife and mother one day. Pray for me." Yes. And she really came through.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah, and it's you know, what's incredible about it is that, you know, like you said, you know, going from being an empress to then being, you know, practically homeless, and you are working in DC with this place of so much political power, but then really kind of entrusting your life to this woman who, in the midst of all that rise and fall of political power, you know, is really a really good Catholic wife and mother, right? And so okay, keep going. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And so back to St. Mary's in Chinatown, they have a mass every year in honor of Blessed Karl, organized by a friend of mine, a friend of ours, Ken Wolf, and and some other people. There's actually
one of the chieftains of our DC friends.
Yes. It's his birthday today, so apparently I just wrote on his Facebook wall, "Happy birthday, Ken." So he organized, I don't know if he still does, organized this mass for Blessed Karl, and I was like, "Oh, that's so exciting! I'm going to go and talk about Zita." And then I heard that their great grandson, Archduke Imre, would be there. And when I first heard that this title, I thought, like, oh, he must be like an old man with a cane. And then I realized, oh no, actually he's quite young. He's our age. And
lovely.
And so Imre was there he was in DC. Actually, step back a minute. I had just gotten back from Rome. I think I also prayed to John Paul II, so I'm sure he's in there somewhere in this whole story, but really with this idea of my vocation on my heart, and praying really hard for what the next step in my life was going to be. And a week later was the feast day of Blessed Karl, which is actually his wedding anniversary. It's not his death day or his birthday, which is typical, but it's really his wedding anniversary.
It's really neat because it's, like you said, it's not typical, and it's the day before John Paul II's feast day, which is really cool.
Who was named for Karl.
Right?
Actually,
exactly.
Right.
And that's like, we have to make sure we say this on the podcast. So that's a fantastic fun fact.
Yeah.
Carls. Yes. Okay, keep going.
Right. Because his father was an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army.
Yep.
At the time he was born.
Beautiful.
So I'm sure they're great friends in heaven. And so it was their 99th wedding anniversary. This is in 2010. And Imre had come to Washington for a 3-month kind of internship. He was kind of doing a tour of all the different political organizations. He was studying international politics. And he had just gotten in town, and they had invited him to speak at St. Mary's for this annual mass. And he had never been to Tridentine Mass before, and he had to sit in the front row. Poor guy.
Oh my goodness. Wow, I didn't know that. How interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, looking back, and I was like, that was good job, courageous. We didn't even notice. And yeah. He got up and spoke afterwards to all of us, and I always tease him because at the time his English was good, but clearly not. So I really admired the fact that he had the courage to get up in front of so many people. I speak pretty well French now. We've lived in like French speaking countries for a long time, but I would have a really hard time to get up and like off the cuff give a speech in French.
Right, exactly. Exactly. See,
great.
The fortitude of his,
great grandmother. Voilà. Yes. So that's so we became, afterwards we were kind of like, it was a big group of us, about of our friends, many of whom and afterwards down in the donut corner of the basement of St. Mary's, we were all like kind of introducing ourselves, and we said, oh, we're all gonna go get a drink afterwards in Georgetown, do you want to come with us? And he was like, I can't, I'm really sorry. And we were all like, oh, he's the great grandson of a saint, he must be super holy, I'm sure.
The Archduke. Yes.
Right. But somehow through all that we exchanged information, and he kind of became one of our friends, and a relationship just kind of blossomed from all of that. And a message I would to if you have any of your listeners who are kind of looking for that special person that they want to launch into this vocation of marriage with, and that are dating. And I tell this to my little sisters who are in kind of that dating stage now. One thing that struck me about Imre and our relationship from A to Z that I think you have to look for is this sense of peace. If you don't have peace in your relationship, that doesn't mean you don't have to ever fight or that everything is always roses, but if you don't have kind of a very deep sense of peace about everything, and a little bit of a detachment to what the final result will be of this relationship, that's a good thing to look for as you're discerning marriage with someone. And I had just kind of through this whole period, these 3 months where I had a crush on him, and we were spending a lot of time together, but he wasn't kind of making any moves. I had kind of a certain detachment and peace about the whole thing that was really a great grace and a gift from God. And 2 days before he was going to leave and to go back to his family who they were then in Brussels, finally he said something, and we decided to start dating right before he was supposed to leave. But then God gave me a wonderful present, because it was right before Christmas, and I took him to the airport the next morning 2 days later to fly him back off home. And we were both like, okay, we're going to be doing a lot of Skyping. This is going to be hard. I don't know how a long distance relationship, we just, 2-day-old relationship. This is strange. And so we go to the airport, and he swipes his credit card to get his ticket, to, his boarding pass. And they're like, sorry, you're stuck here for the next week. What? It's Christmas. I have to go home. My family's waiting for me. And they're like, sorry, no planes are going to Europe for the next week because Brussels forgot to buy salt, and it's like frozen over. So you're
see the that God takes for your love story.
I know, he really does. He really managed. He massage this whole thing. So we had an extra week that really helped us to kind of get to know each other in this new way and solidify everything. And I always say that was one of my favorite Christmas gifts from God, was this snowstorm in Brussels.
It does sound like a Hallmark Christmas movie. I
it really does.
But the best part is, of course, is the fact that your faith was at the center of it. And and to me, there are a lot of monarchs and governments and politicians, but the truth is, you and Imre are a gem, because you really do take your faith seriously, and raise your children seriously. So speaking into that now, what is life like as an archduchess, and what is life like as a Catholic mom and wife in Europe, and not in the United States? As you said, you thought you were gonna be in Cincinnati near your mom and dad, but you're in Geneva, which is totally different context. So how is it different, and what does it mean for you now? And what are your hopes? I'm asking you too many questions at once, so start with that.
I do the same thing. My life, my day-to-day life is very normal. We have 4 little daughters, aged 3 months to 7 years. And, it's probably the same as a lot of your listeners. We're really like in the stage of parenting that's very exhausting and intense, but beautiful at the same time, because we really can see these 4 little gifts that we have, and just kind of always amazed that God has entrusted these 4 amazing little souls to us, which is just crazy, and we love them so much. So that's and it's great to be a team in that too, to kind of see our couple in this new, well, not really new anymore, but this role of Imre as a father and me as a mother, and how we can work together. And it's amazing, because when you are dating and when you're engaged and you have these kind of like sunglasses on of this person, you know them in one way, but you know them so much deeper and better. I feel like I barely knew him before, and since we've been married, and I think, gosh, how did I even know to make this decision to marry this guy? Because I barely knew him, but somehow God gave me this wonderful man. And I think, like, thank you, Lord, that now that I think back on it and I know him so much better now, I barely knew him then, but somehow I knew him enough to know that he was a wonderful man, and he's even more wonderful now. So to see him in this light as a father is a beautiful thing. And my day-to-day life is a very normal mom life. They're upstairs
Target, right? And Trader Joe's, and you're missing those stores.
Oh, you have no idea. Do you know what happens in Europe when you don't have any diapers on a Sunday night at like 9 p.m.? You are out of luck. It's really bad. So I wish I had Target. So my day-to-day life is very normal. We do have to occasionally do some funny things, and I always I'm going to write like a book of bloopers, Katie bloopers of embarrassing situations that I've gotten myself into over the years. But
it'd be so fun to read. Oh my goodness, so cute.
But yeah, it's we occasionally have to do kind of official things, or talk about Blessed Karl, or family events and weddings, and but in the day-to-day normal, I have a very normal life with 4 very normal little girlies here in Europe, which is another kind of a bit of a challenge. And that's why I love this idea of the Endow groups, is that you're building intentional communities too, because I see, especially living so far away from my homeland and my family, how important friendships are, how important building each other up is, because it's so easy to feel isolated and unsupported or to kind of, when you're in your home and you're in the thick of parenting, or you're in the thick of your job, to put on kind of a face that's not the truth, it's not kind of the reality of it. And you so need those relationships where you can be true with each other, truly support each other, that vulnerability.
Absolutely. And when talking to some of our Endow women, I should have them on the podcast at some point, in the UK, just the fact that, they were sharing with me, it's very American to say, I'm going to start a group, I'm going to take charge and do this. But a lot of the social relationships in Europe, the state takes care of a lot of your relationships. And so it's just so strange that that you would rely on the government or the state to like form your friendships for you.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
yeah. So anyway, I'm probably opening up a can of worms I should wait to open up later. But we were talking beforehand about that you've been reading Edith Stein, and she's a big, one of our big Endow saints, and obviously wrote a lot about the feminine genius, and we have a study on her. So tell me what you're reading right now, because that's something that we're very passionate about, is intellectual formation and Endow, and so yes.
Well, a little bit of a story that's kind of like my my goosebump story, including Edith Stein. I was at a Benedictine monastery not too far from here a few months ago, and I had just this. I was in confession with this wonderful little monk who is a little bit sick, and but just has this incredible spiritual life. Is so often the case, no? And there's kind of a physical frailty. There's this deep spirituality that is just super profound. And I had been, I'm in the thick of reading Edith Stein's book about, it's just called Women. It's little excerpts from her conferences that she gave in the 1930s on various subjects, but a lot about the education of women, the vocation of women, the role of women in the 20th century. And she speaks, you would think that she's writing today, the topics that she's tackling, who we are called to be in the world. And, this is the 1930s. So you can imagine kind of what she was facing, but also to be speaking with such authority, such charity, such such a deep vision, and a very realistic vision. Sometimes when we hear priests talk about, I don't know if you had this experience, but there's almost, women are too put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
We're, it's like yes, we are called to be like Mary, but we're not Mary. Each of us has a personality. Mary had her personality and I have mine, and we're not the same people. God designed both of us with who we are. And so there's kind of this reality check of Edith Stein, and that we are becoming the people that we are supposed to be, whether or not we're women or men. And these traits that are inherent to women, or that are sometimes a little bit too idealized or idolized, can hurt us at the same time. So one of the things that this priest, so I'm in confession, and the priest has no idea that I'm reading Edith Stein. I'm just having a regular confession, and all of a sudden he starts quoting Edith Stein that I had just read that very morning.
Stop it! Like, God winks. That's like such a God wink.
It's such a God wink. I was like, oh, okay. And one of the things that he had mentioned that I had found just so profound, he said, the holier and holier that we become, the more, we talk about like, this is a masculine virtue and this is a feminine virtue. It was like, the holier that we become, the more, these things go together. Like how the holiest priests that very often are very soft and can have this compassion that we sometimes think is a feminine virtue. And the holiest women that we know have a strength and a magnanimity that is thought of as a masculine virtue.
Yeah.
And so that's, I thought that was kind of a cool way to look at it as well. Like that the more we embody all the virtues, not just the masculine virtues or the feminine virtues, the holier that we become.
Yes.
And that's something that she develops in her book, or in her one of her conferences.
I really do love that, because there's so much you said that I want to comment on that I think is so important for women to hear, and I want to hear about what your hopes are for Catholic women and what your hope is for Europe and America, but and in the world. But no small questions there. But my coworker, Laura, was just commenting to me about what she loves about Our Lady of Loreto and the Litany of Loreto is that there's so many aspects to Mary, and we can find ourselves in one of her titles, because there's such a unity, and there's also such a diversity of our personalities. And I love that you're reading Edith Stein. I love that God gave that God wing, like, hey, your personality was fashioned in a particular way, and we do this as women. We compare all the time. And okay, it's normal. It's not going to, that's not going to stop necessarily, but we can't let the comparison control us and become an idol of us, or an ideal of other people, an ideal of ourselves. We really want to be truly ourselves, truly humble, and accept ourselves, really, because God intends to make us all saints. He intends, and that means all of our all of our personalities. And sometimes there are parts of our personalities we don't care for, or we wish were different, but there you have it, you know? so I think it's tough sometimes for strong women to, you know, accept that about it, you know?
Absolutely. Totally. And especially, I think some of the stories of the feminine saints are very off. Well, actually, that's not at all true, coming to think about it, because we have so many strong saints, so many strong examples of strong females. Teresa of Avila is the first that comes to mind. I mean, we have so many.
Yes.
And all of these incredibly holy and incredibly strong women who, so this is possible. And I think that was kind of something that I was struggling with. 'Cause I'm like, Lord, I don't know. I'm kind of a choleric person, and I feel like I should maybe be a little bit less so.
I know. I relate. I understand. Yeah. But, you know, Teresa of Avila, you would say she was certainly receptive, certainly docile, certainly all those things, but also like running around reforming monasteries and really tough. So, you know.
Yeah. I'm an old child, so this is also part of what plays into it. But yeah, totally. And so many and like Zita, for example, who clearly had an incredible interior strength, nourished by God, by her time in prayer and adoration and mass, that got her through. And she was a very strong woman who was able to help her husband in some of the hardest times. So
yeah, incredible. Well, I started paying attention to her because of your story, but of course I love history as it is. But thank you so much for this interview. My last question to you, unless there's anything else on your mind, burning Holy Spirit moment, is what are your hopes, you know, in these difficult times that we're living in, especially kind of in a post-COVID world and being European now? Any words of encouragement or just hopes and dreams? What's on your heart these days? No small questions.
Right. I think that the big thing on it is my, first and foremost, my family and our 4 daughters, and the world that we're going to give them. Their education is something that's very close to my everyday world and my, you know, everyday concerns, and their heritage as Christians. You know, as we are here in Europe, and everywhere you look, there's a beautiful cathedral and a monastery and these vestiges of Christendom that are just in front of our eyes. And there's just the beauty that's everywhere here. But at the same time, this like very kind of angry secularism.
Yeah.
That's something that they're going to have to confront. So helping them to live that reality in the world, to be proud of who they are as Christians, to fall back on this relationship with God, on their love of the Blessed Sacrament. And our oldest daughter just made her first communion, and it's been beautiful to accompany her and to see kind of this deep relationship you can have at such a young age. Yes. And this comprehension that's so simple and so sweet, and just to hoping that she can fall back on that when times are going to get, you know, times are difficult now, and they're going to get more so as in the future. Yes. So we are working on building very intentional communities here through some of the projects that we're working on, and as well as very personally in our friendships in Geneva and the friendships of our daughters, to make sure that they are surrounded by people who are going to point them towards the good, the true, and the beautiful. And
so important. God doesn't have grandchildren, as they say. So you know, to raise our children strong in the faith, and I know, like you said, I mean, it's trying now, but it's going to get even more trying. And Europe is particularly heartbreaking because there's so much. Everything is informed with a Catholic ethos, but
it is.
Was it Ratzinger's a soul without a body without a soul? You know,
right? And that's, I think, something that we need to. I think, in a way, some of the philosophies that are currently influencing the world came from Europe. And there is something really profound about the vocation of Europe in the world. And so going forward, we need to look and pray for Europe in a very profound way, and very intensively, that the current trends happening here and some of the lies that are entrenched ever deeper here are rooted out, and that the Holy Spirit really descends on these countries and these peoples who have such a history of devotion. Each one has kind of their personality, right? We live near Geneva, but like it's a little bit like Virginia and D.C. We live on the French side of the border, and France is the eldest daughter of the church. You know, we have the England is Mary's dowry, and all of these countries, since they have each of them their particular flavor, but this wonderful heritage of devotion, and each of them devoted to Our Lady in different ways. And yeah, pray for Europe, because what happens here,
yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
no, but it's just what happens here is impacts the United States, impacts the rest of the world, and we need a lot of prayers.
We need a lot of prayers, and we need definitely revival. And I hope for it. I hope for it, because there's too much beauty that would be lost. But
there are lots of little seeds happening. So we're kind of in that moment at the end of the Roman Empire or something, where
we are.
Yeah, and they're being planted, and we see that everywhere. So there is a lot of reason to hope, and God's in control. This is all kind of, we're placed on this planet in a certain time period for a reason. So lots of reasons to hope and look forward to the future.
Yes, exactly. And it's going to be those little seeds, those little pockets, those families. That's what will bring on revival and rebuild. So thank you so much for the conversation today. Any last thoughts before we say goodbye? It was lovely.
We covered a lot. That was really fun. That went really quickly.